We can start now.
Perfect. All right. Hola a todos. Bienvenidos al episodio de hoy del podcast.
Good morning to everyone. Welcome to the TADAT podcast. I am Beto Hay. We have a two-part event this morning. It will last around 2 hours. The first, we will present one of our colleagues from CIAT, the CIAT International Taxation Network, and we will speak about its relationship with TADAT. We'll talk about the achievements and also about ITN's activities. In the second part of the event, Monica Calihuri, who is representing the Inter-American Development Bank, will talk about the restricted capacity of tax administrations in developing countries. After the roundtable, we will invite the public to pose any questions they may wish to ask of the panelists. You can join us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or by email. So to begin, Gonzalo and Anarelli, if you'd like to begin the discussion, please. Thank you very much, Humberto. And I would like to thank the International Monetary Fund and TADAT and CIAT for having organized this podcast event. And I also welcome my colleagues from the IDB and my colleagues from Argentina and Uruguay for joining us on this podcast. So I'm going to put up a presentation on the screen. As Humberto mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the International Taxation Network, a little bit about our work. And as you can see on the screen, we have some photos of recent meetings of the network. We've had several virtual meetings, of course, but we hope to return to in-person meetings. We have a close relationship with TADAT. As you know, international taxation is based on the work, ITN's work is based on the work of various national tax administrations. We have focuses in several areas. We focus, for example, on the registration of taxpayers. If we do not, we want to ensure that we have a registry that is accurate, that contains accurate information on our taxpayers. We also talk about the submission of tax returns, the accuracy of tax returns, the effective resolution of tax disputes. This is something that we are currently discussing with the IDB, and proper management of tax collection, as well as responsibilities.
Mucho de lo que nosotros hacemos.
Much of what we do, CIAT and TADAT, is complementary. We have a database. This database is maintained using indicators in various areas for which measurements are made or assessments are made. We have some indicators that are not part of TADAT, but they can be useful in more accurately evaluating the performance of a national tax administration. We also evaluate some areas of particular interest to countries. We also focus on good practices, and we also have a database of information on tax administration in terms of the information they use for their decision making. If we can move to the next slide, the objectives of the International Taxation Network are as follows. We identify the work that national tax administrations are doing and see how we can best help them. We do this in order to meet the needs of the countries that are members of the network. We share best practices, progress made in the field. Of course, it's been difficult recently because of the virtual environment, but We continue to work with these countries, and we have a very solid relationship, and we're continuing our work. We also focus on cooperation. We have discussion forums, but sometimes we have to move, of course, from discussion to putting things into practice.
Internacional sería el grupo de trabajo sobre control
With regard to the background of ITN, there was a working group on the control of international tax planning. And this is part of the network. This is what it was called up until 2007. And then there was a permanent committee on international tax planning that there is still a reference to this committee on the CIAT website. And we have a manual from 2017 that is actually quite ahead of its time. It focuses on BEPS, among other things. We also have a catalog of cases, country cases. These are classified by type of planning, type of economic activity. We look at the structure of the cases, and we look at cases involving what was aggressive tax planning. The network, well, it's not that we meet once a year. The meetings give us an opportunity to talk about our activities, to talk about new initiatives, to talk about what our partners are doing, our donors, activities in universities. And this, of course, gives us more information about topics we would like to bring up in the future for discussion. Sometimes we invite representatives of businesses and the private sector. They can give us a different perspective. And in CIAT, we have to recognize that, of course, we are tax experts, and sometimes it's good to have views from outside. This provides this feeds our future agenda. The focus of the network is to provide services to national tax administrations. Our main client is, of course, the tax administrations and also the ministries of finance of our member countries. The ministries of finance have various areas under their responsibility, of course. But they are also entities with which we work. We also work with the OECD, the United Nations, the IMF, obviously. We work with NGOs, for example, with various organizations, also with members of academia, University of Columbia, University of Buenos Aires, among others. We work with various donors who support us. And as I said, we work with private sector representatives. The base of experts, the database of experts that we have forms the cornerstone of our work, or the foundation of our work. We prepare manuals, generate proposals, tools, provide technical assistance, assist with databases, among other activities. If we could move to the next slide, please. Here we can see the network of partners of the ITN. I don't know if I have every logo there, but But you can see here who our donors are. They give us room for maneuver, room for action. Without the support of our donors, we wouldn't be able to do much of what we do. And the membership of our member countries, of course, together with our donors, this provides us the budget to carry out our activities. There was a training company called Vent, a German company, and we worked with them together with the German cooperation. We also work with the Norwegian cooperation. We worked on various innovation projects, Eurosocial. This is a donor, but it is also more a driver of initiatives. We try to work with them in terms of their multilateral focus. We also receive support from training centers, from AICID, training centers in Cartagena, Montevideo, among other locations. And of course, the Swiss cooperation, they also support us with technical assistance. Among our technical partners, and for us, they are extremely important because they provide a wealth of knowledge. There are universities, the OECD, which is, of course, the leading organization in terms of taxation. We work with the IDB, which is our partner in the region. They assist us across a broad range of activities. We've been working very closely with them, and I'm sure that we will continue to do so through many projects. The IMF is an historic partner. We work with them often, as we do with the World Bank and many other organizations, such as the OAS, which provides some public information to CIAT. We also have technical partners, including the IDB, the IGF also, which is an initiative focusing on the activities of mining companies. And we work with them on related tax issues. And this is a very important partner for us in providing more knowledge on the region. We work with Latindad. We have a meeting every year with civil society, as well as with the ministries of finance. And we have, of course, work with the United Nations. And we've organized several meetings with them in 2023 on taxation issues and on other subjects. We also work with a range of experts who provide technical assistance. They are often staff of national tax administrations. Some of them are with the larger, well-known corporations in the private sector, and some of them represent boutique outfits. We are working with them. Sometimes it is our partner. We also work with members of the academic sector, and again, with various companies and advisors and a range of experts on taxation issues. If we could continue, this is the catalog of products and services offered by ITN. So you can see the type of work that that is underway. We have some initiatives that are ongoing. Of course, there's no specific completion date. We are working on a manual, for example, that has some 48 authors. We are working on this. This was published in 2007. We are also working on a database of transnational cases, which we'll be talking about later today. We are also working on a database of cases with the University of Maastricht. We've begun a course on tax planning for national tax administrations. On the databases, I think this is something that where we are most closely related to TADAT because the database consists of indicators. And so sometimes having a representative of TADAT, an advisor, look at this database, this is helpful in the assessments. We work in technical assistance in various areas and consultancies also. We provide a consultancy service, and we have a tax assistance service also that can provide assistance not only through response to a written request, but also by video, for example. We also have documents, working documents. These are in specific areas of interest. Sometimes in 2012, for example, there were a number of cases that led us to develop a very specific and specialized working document. We work with the OECD and the IDB on a number of tools and different types of software. The public information tool known as DIP. So there are various sources of public information on a range of countries. We're working with the IDB on this, and specifically, for example, we're also working on tax disputes and dispute resolution. And we're working on various issues related to international taxation, transfer pricing for developing countries. We work with the OECD on a proposal with regard to BEPS.
Otros socios, disculpen.
And we work with other partners on BEPS-related issues. And now I'd like to speak a little bit about some of our products and what they consist of. So if we look at the database of transfer prices, this is a database that is very complete, comprehensive. It refers to the adoption of norms and regulations on transfer pricing. We have updated it, we've refined it, we're always improving it, and countries make requests regularly. It's on that basis that we're consistently improving the database and updating it. We have benchmarks for transfer pricing in the region. This database also helps us to conduct evaluations. We use the information in the database or information collected from surveys to do a diagnostic. We did so in Bolivia, for example, where we worked on transfer pricing together in partnership with the Swiss cooperation and Norwegian cooperation. So it's a very interesting database. As you can see on the screen, you can look at when, you can see when standards on transfer pricing were adopted. And so we can see that although this has been discussed for a long time, many experiences were not really detailed or recorded or registered until after 2010. We look at there's a range of data. It's all very interesting. And Anarela will give us some information on the database now. Ana, the floor is yours.
Pestaña relacionada con APAS, acuerdos de
To give you more information about that, APAS, and how we can use these bases and which sectors we work and who has the possibility to use these but do not do so. When we talk about the price transfer, we also have mechanisms to ensure that taxpayers comply with the price regime, and this is to do with 4 and 6 on presentation of complete and accurate tax filing. We have a database here, which you can see. This is taken from BEPS. This is an initiative because some countries asked us about some of the BEPS measures that they want to implement. And what we decided is to set up a database so that the countries can use these indices and specific data and see how they're implementing the BEPS action recommendations and what experiences they've had with these. This is information reported by countries. So this is not a peer review. We have 17 countries with data from 2021, and here we are updating the information currently. Gonzalo, tell us a little bit about how you update the information every year to help our member countries. And this is a very valuable part of your work. And as Anarela rightly said, this enables us to know who is doing what and how they're doing it. Because the countries very often ask, what are the other countries doing? Where's the data? How do they practically implement it? How exactly do they go about it? They ask all these questions. And if you look at the database, for example, the most implemented actions are the minimum standards in the BEPS. But in fact, there are many countries that have decided to implement actions that go beyond the minimum standards. And a lot has to do with topics that are most relevant for the region, which is risk management, for example, and also in relation with the taxpayer. This is action 12. I think those are the most difficult to manage, as these require a very refined risk management from the countries in order to have a timely response. If the action 12 doesn't have the desired impact, and action 13 also has to do with risk management. This is another action that is changing the way we will be working with transfer pricing in the future. Now, what's important for transfer pricing, one of the most important topics for the region is the 8, 9, and 10 actions that have not been implemented so much. So they do have an added value in order to improve their tax regime. And another topic that has to do with that, one of the big challenges in the countries that many have implemented, and many are asking, how do we really implement Action 14? That's one of the most important actions, and we accept, that these will also be very relevant in the future. Now let's move on. Anarela, this is the book on the control of international tax planning, dating from 2017. We're updating it in relation to BEPS, where we have greater digitalization that we have to take into account. In general, this helps tax officers to know what are the main components of the taxpayers and the aspects how they can best deal with these. We also have the various departments within the administration. Now, these can be used by a tax assessor in order to make recommendations. These have to do with conflict resolution, for example. And this handbook has 6 chapters divided into 42 sections, and they were written by 48 authors. They are experts on this, and there are many organizations, academia interested in this, tax administrations, also members from the private sector. Now, the sections are being published separately once a month. We have 8 sections already published, and in the next month, we will be publishing 5.3 written by the Global Forum and 5.5 on cooperation between companies. Now, we see that every month there's more and more sections that are being published. Now, this is a topic, another one, the GAAR. This is a very important topic, general anti-abuse regulations, rules. Now, this has to do with the support from civil society. German corporation assisted us. This is how we go a little bit more in depth in taking up an approach and using the toolkit, because the countries have many challenges. There's not always a clear solution. We have to have anti-abuse rules. All the risks that a tax administration is facing need to be managed, and there can be risks that come up more often, but we cannot imagine what are all the risks specific to each tax administration. And we also know that in some countries there's a lack of trust by taxpayers and their tax administration, where we've not a good implementation of these GAAR. Sometimes they have implemented only partly, some countries in the region up to 30%, and others are still figuring out how to implement this. So these are rules that even, well, when they are partly implemented in an arbitrary way, they, in a random way, they can be challenging. We also need to see how to have an effective design of these GAARs? What is the standard model of a GAAR that a country can have, taking into account local or international, regional experience, adapting it, and how managing their implementation, what should be done before, during, and after, with whom should they work, in terms of planning also. That is also very important when we come to the implementation. We have to identify them properly by a committee who will determine in which cases we apply these GAAR and how we will resolve this. All of this can be found in the toolkit, a very useful self-assessment tool. They have some graphics that are quite useful. You first can decide if you need a GAR or not, and if you have, for example, an international GAR, Action 6 of BEPS, this action, and also Action 15 have been implemented in some conventions or not, and how to make use of it. So I think that was just a brief overview of the content, and I really recommend that you have a closer look at it. Let's move on now. This is another interesting, innovative project where we're working in a network. The International Taxation Network is an international network. This was asked by the countries as part of a meeting on price control by multinationals. What we need to know is what public information exists and how to use it. We have initiatives from many organizations. We're supported by German cooperation. We've been analyzing data using specific software, and we can imagine what the situation would be. In an island, we see a tax officer that is trying to manage a lot of information, but he has difficulty accessing it. There can be a language problem, the fact that public information is not in a public domain. We have to look for it in office at the other side of the globe. And you can also have information that is of no use. You can see all these sharks going around the island and a lot of uncertainty. There can be public information or not. And an Article 26 of a treaty, for example, or an agreement on exchange of information. And then what about the content? If you have information, we need to determine whether it's really useful. And if there's so much information, you don't know where to start. So what is important is to say where we can find the information and how to get to that information. We have 370 sources from 45 countries, 8 organizations grouped together into 37 categories. Next slide will show us how we use this GPS and transport. It's not only a website that you have a link to public information, but we said if this information is on a website or not published, if you have to look for it in office, what is the name of the organization that's managing the source? What is the process to have access to the information step by step, 1, 2, and 3, the data necessary to access information, and then the information, once you've accessed it, sometimes you can have 10 fields in a specific for specific fields, and then others only have 2. Then there's the cost of information. There's also the language challenges. We're working on having 4 official languages: Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English, and then criteria per country, per category, and obviously the link towards all this information. So this is a very interesting document. On the next slide, we will give the floor back to Anarela. I will just make a few comments because we're running out of time. Now, when it comes to dispute resolution, we work with the IDB. We're rolling out initiatives, new initiatives. We have the 5 concept to prepare a diagnosis tool, and we divide it into 3 main themes for dispute resolution, whether they are domestic disputes or international disputes. These topics also have to do with legal issues, and we're trying to identify opportunities for improvement, for optimum resource management, and facilitate decision making in order to effectively make use of all the possibilities of cooperation. Now, this model is being implemented in many countries. We take into account regional requirements. So this is what we're working on, and we hope to have a pilot project by March next year. Thank you very much, Anarela. Now, just a short comment to talk about transnational cases of tax base erosion. We're working with the University of Maastricht on this. They're supporting us quite a lot. The objective is to fill a gap. When we talk about the challenges tax administrations have during the pandemic time, they kept asking me whether another country also is facing the same challenges that we can learn from. So these cases, of course, are confidential. We need to consult them, and we see that many countries are working on this transnational challenges, and we thought of establishing a case, a database of transnational cases of tax base erosion. Here we have comments from the countries, but what is important is not to resolve the case per se, but more identifying the risk. So the focus of this database is to represent the risk, how to identify the risk. We have a template with Castilla-La Mancha University, and we collect cases. We try to harmonize them. It's very difficult to put one case into a template. The idea is to provide sufficient information for countries to establish a catalog of risks. And if there are some risks, we can get into contact with other tax administrations to identify avenues of cooperation applicable to a specific sector that have similar risks. So this holds great potential. We can say that we're still in the pilot stage. We will definitely improve as we go along. This is also promoting cooperation among member states. And the next slide. Let me make a few comments about what we find in the database. First, we have the country profile. We have general information about the tax system in the country. If they have specific treaties, tax agreements, special regimes, and so forth. This helps us to understand the context in which the case falls, and then we analyze the case per se. We start with a design. We look at all the cases possible to identify the risk. We look at the officer reporting. At the University of Maastricht is sometimes analyzing these cases. The approach is to identify risks. So we don't necessarily have a conclusion of what happened at the end of the case, but rather we seek to identify the risk in the given case. Now, the database has a search function depending on the country, the risk per sector, or per keyword. Here, what we can see is the different risks, the various risks that we have identified in the database. Transfer pricing is most worked on, but we also have other risks. Some can be considered as hybrid risks and treaty abuse. We have many treaties, matters of restructuring. There are many structures, and in many cases, we have more than one risk. So it's not one risk per case, but it can be a whole series of risks that affect a specific case. The next slide, we see misuse per economic sector. Here we have design, manufacturing, and sales. We have other sectors that are a little bit that have less risks, with, for example, the energy sector, telecommunications, or a financial sector. These are the cases that were reported. This is not an exhaustive list. And finally, let me just say that these databases are available in English and Spanish to the public, except the database of cases that are restricted to those who contributed the tax administrations. Of course, confidential, private information will be deleted. Of course, that information cannot be in the public domain. Now, having talked about this project, I now would like to introduce two colleagues and friends who have contributed greatly to the development of the network and all these tools and we have presented. We have Marcia Brostein, is part of international taxations from a large tax contributors in Uruguay. We also have Veronica from International Public Income and Taxation in Argentina, and they will give us examples of specific cases that have to do with this database that we've presented. Let me start with Marcia, who will talk about her case. Thank you. Good morning to all. I'm very pleased to share experience from Uruguay and our tax administration. Let's see if you can see the screen with my slide, with my presentation. Now, as Gonzalo said, there are many cases that are very important. In this specific case, why am I talking about that? Because we have to identify the risk before we go to the audit. Why is this case so important? Because it showed us how important it is to manage risks, not only on transfer pricing, but also on international taxation. And we know Gonzalo, risk management has to be in a holistic done in a holistic way. Multinational companies have specific ways of tax planning. I think this case gives us a good example, and we can say today we do have international taxation risk management. We obtain all the information, we take all that information and we apply it. As you can see, this case is treaty shopping, imported transfer pricing of a permanent establishment. Now, what's so important here is not so much transfer pricing, but this is where the challenge in the case in point lies. Now, it's quite a complicated schematic. This is a multinational group that manufactures, leases, and sells energy generation equipment. So this is the name of the company, ASK. So specializing in selling energy equipment to a state company in Uruguay. It is also to lease equipment to a related company in Germany, but the rest of the cost come from Uruguayan companies, well-known Uruguayan companies. So here we have an operation of leasing from a German company. But if you look closer, the first thing we have is the leasing of equipment, that is the invoices coming from a German company to an Uruguayan company, and the largest part of the cost of the if the Uruguayan company was to rent the equipment. So first that I want to show you is that we don't see any tax haven present here. All these companies are visible. They are paying taxes in developed countries. This is a very important point. We look at the next slide. To understand this case, we have to give you some of our past regulations that we have in Uruguay. We have an anti-hybrid rule, if I may call it that. We can deduct corporate income tax, those expenses that are corporate income tax, personal income tax. In the cases that are not taxed 25%, we have a proportionate deduction. And then we also have income tax on non-residents, where we tax income on activities in Uruguay at a 12% rate. That's important on the income received. And there's also pay withholdings from local Uruguayan companies. When we have agreements that are automatically applicable in Uruguay, there are countries that do not apply this automatically, but we see that, for example, Ecuador has made some changes to its operations. And it's also important, the agreement between Uruguay and Germany is the only one where the right to use commercial and industrial equipment are included in Article 7 of the agreement. So what happens if there's no permanent establishment? If the German company is not a permanent establishment in Uruguay, then it is taxed in Germany. What happens? Well, if they work in Uruguay, the activity that we talked about is leasing the equipment, and they are not included in income tax on non-residents. For the leasing from the German company, which is a non-resident company, but it is not uncovered by that taxation because that is included in Article 7. Of course, this has taken a long time. We've taken 4 months to analyze this. Let's move on. Now, of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Let's now look at the schematic. Now, this is really a big puzzle that we can see here in this design here. Now, we have the parent company established in the United States, and we have a lot of problems with US companies. And then what happens? The equipment comes directly from the US. For us, that is not the problem. And I will explain why. If we say, if there is an invoicing from one company to another, but that company has added value or selling to another country, we don't have any problem with it. But we have a permanent establishment which we discovered which brought us to say that the problem actually resides elsewhere. The Uruguayan company had a lot of making a lot of profits, and we have also expenses deducted. And this is when we did our study, we've been comparing that with companies that could be related, but looking at it within a series of similar companies. We have to do with companies that have similar operations. So this is how we've analyzed the situation. And this speaks to the leasing operations of the company. And now, this is where we could have stopped our investigation. But one of the most important points is that the taxpayers said that the owner of the equipment was a Spanish company. So we continued investigating, and this is where we arrived. Then we saw that was a German company. Why did they choose a German company to invoice and not the Spanish company? Because of the difference of the use of industrial equipment that is included in Article 12, that is included in our tax agreement with Germany. That's included in Article 7. If you look at the German company, has a 33% rate, And you can see 120, it has a 28% rate. And this regard was the only tax that was paid from the leasing income. So we have 120 deduction. As we discovered, the German company did not bring any added value. That we, in the like in many other countries, and we've decided why was that the case, and what we've seen that there was no reason for that company to exist. It didn't bring any added value. So this 119 paid to the Spanish and US public establishment. What else did we discover? Why a permanent establishment in the US if it's a Spanish company? The US, in fact, did not know about this permanent establishment. So that's why we talked about unknown, because there was no income to be recorded. The revenue was not generated in the US related to the permanent establishment. So they were unaware of this. What happens? And let's look at Spain. What happened in Spain? Spain did recognize this permanent establishment. And what is the internal rule in Spain? That rule indicates that the profits coming from a permanent establishment of a Spanish company, if they are being taxed to at least 19%, they should not be taxed in Spain. So what happens? This rule has a second part to it, and that is that this 10% rate is valid if there is a double taxation agreement. There's, of course, depending on exchange of information, if there's an agreement between Spain and the US, which in this case did not exist. So Spain received the profits, but did not tax it either. And then we also have dividends that go to the UK, and they were not covered by the EU rule either. So what can we conclude from this? This treaty shopping is, for us, something new. Whether Germany or Spain, we thought that it was only operations with the US. But because this planning had no reason to exist, neither in Spain or in Germany. They were not bringing any added value. So they were not complying with our rule. We were pretty sure that that was the case because they did not pay any taxes. All these millions were only paid $192,000. Now, if we had taxed the leasing activities, it would have been millions of dollars that would have been taxed. Would have been once audited, we would have had a good income from them. So our problem is not as such with tax havens, but countries that high tax jurisdictions. Anarela, the last slide will give us the conclusions. We see they have the balance sheet 102, 120 that I've been talking about. And then on the other side, we've not been receiving anything from income tax on non-residents. And in Germany, they paid a 28% on corporate tax in Germany, and Spain that does not recognize the existence of a permanent establishment. This is where we have the conclusion of our case. And that is just an example of how challenging it is to detect this tax planning. So we have a risk management in place of transnational taxation. Thank you very much, Marcia, for sharing that experience.
Multinacionales que presten atención porque si no.
Thank you very much for sharing this experience in this transnational case. I'd like to give the floor now to Veronica Grondona to present her case. You have the floor, Veronica. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've also been enjoying the presentation by my colleague. I think it's very interesting also, the presentation you made regarding the various databases. I'm not going to be giving a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to talk about a couple of cases that we have. One from 2020, which we included in the CIAT database. It's the case involving capitalization. And this is something that we identified following our risk analysis. We were working with a risk matrix, and one of the factors in the matrix was a high level of indebtedness in operations. And using the risk matrix, we were able to identify this case. The subject received a loan for a 5-year term. The interest rate was about 7% annually in dollars. After our analysis, using the free competition references, we saw that there were several adjustments, but and we noted that this was a market interest rate. There was no objection to the operation, but when we looked at the features of the loan, we saw that there were issues with the reserves, with the dividends, how these were allocated. So the original purpose of the loan was to address the debt incurred by paying off accrued interest. So this was a feature of the loan. So this led us to quickly think that there was an issue with capitalization, that the contractual terms were, well, quite particular. We also noted that there was non-compliance in the payment of interest. These were recorded as liabilities, but then we noted this non-compliance. So given the business strategy and the purpose of the loan, we determined that this situation was problematic. And we also noted the situation with the local taxpayers. We noted the economic circumstances. And in this case, we determined that the taxpayer was trying to obtain a loan, and when they were in fact did not really meet the conditions for the granting of this loan. One of the issues that we highlighted in this case was that interest was deducted, but no payment was made, no withholding at source occurred. So there was no entry of capital. There were issues with the distribution of dividends. And this was restructured as a loan. We conducted an analysis of the operation, and we concluded that this case needed to be that we needed to investigate this case. And we looked at the economic situation. We looked at our tax law and the true nature of this operation, which really consisted of of capital. It wasn't really a loan, even though a loan contract existed. So as I mentioned, this was an operation of capitalization. So that's the first case that I wanted to quickly describe. Another case that we have is in the database, and it was sent to CIAT in 2018. It involves a distribution scheme. There is a manufacturing entity, a distributing entity, but the operation was carried out through an intermediary in a third country. So in this type of case, these happen quite often. In 90% of these cases, exports and imports are using intermediaries. And the particular features of this case we see the different valuations of the operation in customs. And this to minimize tax on profits. So this sounded the alarm bell for us. Various countries have their various rules regarding imports and and exports and the customs valuation of these. In this case, we identified it as being a risk. Obviously, in this case, what we identified was the following situation. The price is of the goods entering the country was excessive in comparison with the price of the goods going out of the country. So the taxable base was therefore eroded in Argentina. If we look at the functions of the intermediary, it doesn't justify the difference in price. There are a number of cases where intermediaries are involved. The intermediary here plays the specific role. They take on risk. And in this case, we saw that the intermediary wasn't playing the usual role. Today, in Argentina, we are using specific country reports to develop a risk index so as to compile information on the various cases. We've used the specific country reports to learn about various circumstances involving lower level of assets. We've looked at the number of employees, the level of profits identified in various jurisdictions, and then looked at the tax rate. So with these various pieces of information, we've been able to identify in a timely manner a number of cases. For this particular case, we did not yet have these specific country reports that I just mentioned, but these reports do provide valuable information. And they help with the timely identification of risk. Finally, I don't know if I have a couple of more minutes. If I could just have just a few moments. I wanted to describe one additional case. We've identified it as for inclusion in the database. It's a very interesting case for Argentina. It involves an abuse of international agreements, and it was referred to the Supreme Court of Justice. This involved a company that was established in a country with which Argentina has a double taxation treaty or agreement. It was a company subject to a special regime. It was an investment platform type of company. It was not considered to be domiciled in that country. Nevertheless, it was restructured. It restructured how it distributed dividends. As I mentioned, this company was an investment platform, and it was domiciled in another country. So it was restructured so that the dividends would be routed through Chile and then routed to Argentina. So the payment of tax on profits was therefore impacted. So only the dividends, only the dividends would be taxable. Dividends from the contracting party would be taxable. It was the dividends were not considered as being as originating in Chile. They were not being taxed on their revenues in Chile. In addition, as it was party to the agreement, they needed to be taxed in the source country. And as it was, that country was Chile, they couldn't be taxed in Argentina. So there was a double taxation in Chile and Argentina. The conduct of the taxpayer here was one in which they were trying to avoid double taxation. They were not acting in good faith. So I think I've reached the end of my 15 minutes, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you very much for your description of the cases. Gives us a good idea of what's happening. And something that caught my attention in what you said is that taxpayers are deciding to take very aggressive positions in terms of their planning. You would think, how could they possibly think of taking this course of action with regard to transfer pricing, for example? So if we look at the tax administrations, this is a challenge for them, not only to identify it, but also to investigate and to prove it. So these are administratively very complex cases. And if we look at our database of cases, activities that were happening 20 years ago are still happening today. And as you mentioned, they're sometimes very difficult to identify and difficult to prove. I would like to thank both our presenters. And if I could take a few moments, if you agree, Humberto, to reply to some questions. Should I mention the questions? Yes, I can convey the questions and you can reply. The first question, to what extent are other tax administrations participating in efforts to work with tax administrations in other areas, for example, in the Pacific? As you know, we are working with the network of tax organizations, regional tax organizations. We have a range of activities, but trying to coordinate this database is a lengthy process. To compile the data is not easy. We need to have the capacity in the organization concerned. We need to have a back and forth with the countries to clarify certain points that countries may not understand. So for each organization, even if they're familiar with our database, and based on our experience, we need to have we need to have these national administrations be able to devote the necessary time. My dream is to have global information on all countries available, but this is a slow process. And as you know, regional organizations are often smaller in size, so a lot of planning is needed, and it just takes more time. That was the reply. Second question, just so that we can save some time. Is analytical work being conducted on data compiled to identify certain cases and to identify solutions so that countries don't have to reinvent the wheel? Well, we have compiled statistics, for example, the risks in certain economic sectors, other risks that have been identified. We have information from the BEPS and transfer pricing databases, but they're not easy data to interpret. If we look at the graphic on economic sectors that are most often audited, it seems that there isn't necessarily so much about agriculture or the mining sector, for example. We're not comparing cases across sectors. So there may be more cases in the manufacturing sector, but fewer in agriculture and mining, but they may be more serious cases. So we need to look at the data very carefully. And the information that we have is a sample, but it isn't all. We need to spend more time. We need more cases. I think we have fewer than 40 cases in the database currently. And we need to keep growing our database. What we have done is to prepare a document on measures to control transfer pricing. We've developed some proposals, and these are based on the cases that we've seen in a number of countries involving transfer pricing. This is a pending task, and our initiative needs to mature. The initiative on that. We need to look at various countries. Is it of interest to those countries? Is there a gap at the international level in terms of the features of a particular case? Thank you. Thank you very much to the audience for those two questions. And thank you, Gonzalo, Anarela, Marcia, Veronica. Thank you very much for your presentations. Very well done. Thank you. And now in the second part of this event, I'll give the floor to Monica Calehuri, who will moderate a roundtable discussion and take some questions from the audience as well, and final comments from our presenters. So Monica, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and see so many specialists on the panel from different tax administrations who will be answering some questions related to tax administrations and the challenges they are facing in terms of international taxation. As we've seen in the previous presentations, that this is quite a daunting task for tax administrations dealing with international taxation and tax planning. Sometimes a matter of legislation, the domestic legislation is not suited to deal with all these designs of cases. And it can also have to do with the tax administrations themselves. Now, in our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we have countries in the region that are facing various structural challenges, low economic growth, high inequality, and many challenges in environmental challenges as well. We have tax policies and tax management that endeavor to meet all these challenges that the tax administrations are facing. We can also see how change in behavior of individual taxpayers, but also corporations can affect the operations of a tax administration. And then we talk about tax incentives. And nevertheless, these challenges, whether it's structural challenges or directly tax and payment, sometimes have to do with institutional frameworks or weak policies. Now, we would like to discuss the following question that will be the focus for our discussions. How can developing countries with a limited capacity deal with the challenges of international taxation? And to talk about this topic through various questions, we would like to invite Gonzalo Arias, who's been with us since the beginning. He's Director of International Cooperation and Taxation at CIAT, and we all know him very well. Also pleased to have Alberto Baris. We've listened to his podcast. I'm sure many of you. He's a fiscal consultant, studied at Harvard University, and is a long-standing colleague of mine. He's a tax specialist, especially for the IDB. We're also pleased to have my colleague Umbaldo Gonzalez. He's also lead specialist in tax administration at the Inter-American Development Bank. He has a wealth of knowledge on international taxation. It's really a great pleasure to have them on our panel. To start, we would like to ask a question to each of the panel members. We have limited time available, but I would like to start with Gonzalo, the experience of CIAT, which is a strategic partner of the IDB on taxation. We always count on CIAT, not only for events and these databases that we've been talking about. Gonzalo, if we think of small countries, developing countries that have restricted technical and human resource capacity, how can international organizations and multilateral organizations support tax administrations to overcome their challenges related to international taxation? Related to this, what kind of support specifically can be lended to these countries? Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you for including me in this roundtable and share with you. This is a question that we've been hearing about quite a lot. Every time we participate in meetings or we have discussions, we continue to make progress on transparency and BEPS. And we have a big data, blockchain, artificial intelligence, all these dimensions that we take into account. And tax administrations in developing countries, we have to know that some of them have tax administrations that are more or less developed or more than others. Some have a lot of shortages, sort of lack of capacity. And international taxation are based on the pillars of tax administration. The international taxation cannot work if these pillars are not in place. So what's important here is for all kind of tax administrations, but even more so for small ones. Investment is key, but you have to prioritize what is the best invention. You have to invest at one stage or another. For any organization, we need to invest. And then strategic planning and intelligent, smart use of resources. We can only do so much. What are really the areas that are most important to support and where can I not? So we cannot manage everything. And that's what the case in many countries. There are various fronts to deal with, and this is quite a difficult choice to make. We cannot control a large company because we don't have capacity. Well, that's what companies are counting on. That's why they go to tax havens, because there's no way of being controlled. So it is quite a complex story. But we try to build capacity in countries that are less developed. Firstly, we do a diagnostic with great precision to see if their demand is really feasible given the limited resources, whether financial or human resources. What are the expectations of the country in question? If it's a topic that will take much longer, then maybe that is not the project to prioritize, because you might not have the political will to address this. There's a lack of infrastructure as well. And something that is even more important, we have to work with international organizations, and where we can do more is to see how we can work in some flexibility in countries with low capacity. We cannot have a situation that's applicable to all. Bring in some flexibility for a developing country. For a developed country, yes, we can implement more ambitious goals, but there are countries that fall because of their specific context or lack of resources, just cannot do this. And another aspect is political will. We need the government to support the tax administration. That's always an important topic. When we run projects in low capacity countries, we try to see how we can mitigate the risks when we develop a project in order to achieve the best results. And indeed, there are so many challenges. We recognize this, and there's no single solution. So I don't want to belabor this point now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. It is true, there are many challenges that tax administrations have to deal with, particularly in international taxation. We need to invest. We have to establish databases. We need to build capacity. We have infrastructure challenges in the department dealing with international taxation. So international organizations' support is key. for our tax administrations in the region. And then this networking we've been talking about. The experience has shown us that this works very well, learning from success stories and also less successful stories, learning from our peers on all of these challenges. Now, we have another challenge. Gonzalo already mentioned this, as well as some previous participants. We have the minimum global tax. That is another challenge. A minimum taxation. This is another challenge that has come along. In a globalized world, this is something that we are looking at. We have Humberto Baris here with us. Alberto Baris, perhaps you can switch on your camera. I did switch on my video. We know that you have such a wealth of knowledge that we would like to listen to you. Alberto, what is your main approach, for example, how to protect our tax base and avoid tax base erosion, which is a challenge. In your opinion, is this benefiting countries, or is this rather harmful for countries? No. When I say that we are quite lucky to get such a question, but now, unfortunately, I do not have my video on, but let me say, why do we have income profits? We talk about a loss of sovereignty, an investment in sovereignty. If I trade with a series of countries, I am handing over my sovereignty. So if I work on an international capital and service market, we have to yield some of our sovereignty. So why do we have income tax? One, because there are some negative standards. We don't have sufficient infrastructure, human resources, enough legal certainty. And then a more sophisticated point, we need to think of unused resources. It might be a small industry. Now, if there is a valid argument to deal with these challenges, I don't know. If we work with countries, we might work with countries that don't have legal certainty. How do we prevent tax avoidance? Internally, this can be clearly defined. If I work with a profitable industry, what I'm doing is we have a clear profit that can be identified. When I travel and I see, when we look, for example, on a product that is produced in a duty-free zone, for example, that That's always the counterexample that we can give. But another way is to misuse other partner jurisdictions with which we have financial or trade relations for goods and services. I don't want to name any specific countries. I can have a long list. And then we move on to a second benefit. The tax-free zones in Latin America, in the case of the Dominican Republic, there's a little bit of tax withholding, but those who are in these areas do not pay any taxes. So there's a use of this tax-free zone. We can know, for example, that a company that has that operates in a tax-free zone is not bringing us any resources. So that is something that we need to put into order horizontally. And then also in terms of the official payment of taxes. If taxes are, for example, paid, we can have different payment schemes for a general regime, for a specific branch. And then we talk about incentives. If I have a minimum tax and we see distrust between tax administrations that can help. If we have a minimum tax floor, at least we have some certainty that there is some profits being taxed. So that tax floor will give us at least a way of putting order in our tax administration and tax something. Then there's a fourth challenge, and the fifth, if I have time, there's a problem of transition. A lot of these profits work through contracts signed between states. We wrote an article with some of the colleagues here. We were thinking of two solutions in this regard. We also have that reflected in one of our blogs. One is to give a deadline and do what we call a phasing. What is a phasing? For these countries, maybe for a period of 3 years, they will maybe not immediately be able to resolve the issue. And I would think of more long term. But that's not a reason for not to start. And then there's another mutual agreements, multilateral agreements. And then there's a last point that I can raise that has to do with the organization. If you make great efforts, say there's a political problem. The political problem might be that democracy representing the citizenry, no taxation without representation. And that brings us to another type of taxation, what we in the article call taxation by imbalance negotiation, and including companies that are quite powerful. We're in the process of concerted addition. That is the reality. So then we have a challenge in terms of legitimacy. We need to work with a strong international organization that is more representative. Secondly, there's a technical challenge. All these processes, as is the case on transparency, identifying the final beneficiaries, we have to exchange information, and that is a long endeavor where we hold a lot of responsibility. Helping ourselves is helping other countries, learning by doing. There are many errors committed because of political reasons throughout the structure. So then there's a big challenge that remains to ensure that tax policy is helping the tax administration. Tax administration and political administration in Latin America. Tax policy, we have seen in various countries, there are also tax policy that come into play. If the two don't work hand in hand, there will be no taxes collected. And a second point with which I would like to conclude, I have the impression that we need to try and ensure that cooperation is not only with tax administrations, but identifying a possible process. What do I mean by this? When in Pillar 1, we ensure that companies, at least annually in my country, that's the case, in Chile every 3 months, but companies, domestic companies pay within 20 days. So Google, for example, will file taxes every year, but a small a bakery can be taxed in a different way. So if we don't level the playing field in the short term, when we don't deal with digital services, we, if we don't convince the US that it's always important now that we have a minimum tax, which is different from from ours, this can represent some incentive. If we do not tax digital companies, including for financial transactions, we will see a world that is completely out of balance, where it would be difficult to implement any instrument whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Alberto. You've commented extensively on the challenges and the need for digitalization, for electronic invoicing. This makes us think that more time is needed, much more time. Efforts are being made to find solutions for countries to share knowledge, knowledge of specialists and experts in the region. And also, of course, the role of international organizations and tax administrations. With regard to cooperation and collaboration among international organizations, I think that there's a tool that's being developed. This tool will measure or assess the maturity of tax administrations. Talking of international discussions, international disputes rather, I would like to invite Ubaldo Gonzalez, who has extensive knowledge in this area. Perhaps you could talk about these tools, whether they will support tax administrations. What is your understanding of international tax issues I'll give you the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. Very pleased to be with everyone today. 2 points to respond to previous speakers. Alberto, first of all, your presentations are always so rich in references. It's always a pleasure to listen to his presentations. Sometimes difficult to grasp all points. I would like to announce that we are working on a product to help smaller countries to better manage international taxation. We are trying to offer solutions in 3 areas. Just purely in the legal area, we're trying to work on the OECD pillars, the BEPS, the multilateral agreements, the 2 pillars that are coming up. This is all very complex, and we're trying to simplify the legal aspect so as to assist countries. We're trying to provide administrative guidelines on how tax administrations can proceed, and we hope to offer this product in 2023. There also needs to be a focus on the attitude of the tax administration towards companies or corporations. There needs to be a change. There needs to be a different or a new dialogue between corporations and tax administrations. There needs to be more transparency and greater exchange of information. And here, this is where this is linked to the idea of arbitration and softer means of resolving disputes. This is important because tax administrations in Latin America need to have solutions. The situation there even affects foreign direct investment. We 1 year ago, we were working with our friends at CIAT. We were working on a product, and Gonzalo referred to it in his presentation. It is a toolkit. A toolkit for tax administrations to prevent tax disputes. I'll give an example. If an auditor is conducting an audit, as Marcia and Veronica mentioned, it's good to have sound basis for legal arguments. Sometimes this situation can lead to atypical conflicts. And this can adversely affect a country's reputation. And so we're looking at taking a preventive approach, prevention of these disputes. And for disputes that are already happening, disputes that may even reach the Supreme Court some 18 years after they begin. These types of disputes we're focusing on these also. This is not an easy issue. There are two types of cultures that are at clash here. We have the Napoleonic Civil Code in countries in Latin America, and then we have the Anglo-Saxon law and case law, which focuses on the friendly settlement of disputes or conflicts. We have a global economy, and global taxation is a global issue, so something needs to be done. So the Americans, the British, others, they have different approaches. There is a great deal of pressure to have mandatory arbitration. The risk is a serious one. I think we all think that the risk lies in corruption. Up in the last 10 to 12 years, as soon as a tax administration becomes involved in a dispute, there is an unavailability of credit. If we look at Pillar 1 of the OECD, which focuses on the market, on large corporations, we see that there are a number of challenges. And this is something that we're focusing on with the development of the toolkit. We need to act with transparency and in a good faith, so that officials are not themselves being accused in the courts of breaching the law in terms of the approach taken to resolve disputes. I always think about this brings many thoughts to my mind. If I think about the sale of Adidas, a French company, Bernard Tapie's company, it was sold for 400 million, I believe. The next year, Crédit Lyonnais Mr. Tapie complained to the state, said he had been defrauded. It was a fraudulent transaction, and the state resolved this by arbitration. It was submitted to arbitration, and they ruled in favor of Tapie, and saying that he had the right to collect this 400 million.
Del Estado francés hacia esta ciudad.
And they said that he had tricked the French state. So we look at the unavailability of public credit. This should be considered here. And Christine Lagarde, of course, who was the brilliant head of the IMF and career in EU institutions. This we all know the outcome. But what I'm talking about is a public credit. This is arbitration that was poorly resolved and which created headaches for all. What am I trying to say here? And I'd like to conclude by saying that we're trying to develop this tool together with our colleagues at CIAT to give confidence to tax administrations in the structuring of their friendly dispute settlement policies. We're looking at the procedural guarantees. And again, we're focusing on transparency. We need to have a flexible way to resolve these conflicts while respecting the law. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate and for giving me the floor, Monica. Thank you very much, Ubaldo. I have many thoughts in reaction to the comments that you've made, Gonzalo, Ubaldo, and Alberto, in international taxation and the challenges being faced. We have other issues as well. How do we coordinate our efforts and how do we further capacity development? And I think this is a huge challenge facing all of us. And I have a question from one participant. One of the questions that was asked, I think was quite interesting. Your experience, in your experience in capacity development, what has been the most difficult experience thus far? We have two institutions here. We have CIAT, we have the IDB. And they are very active in the region. They've been so for a long time. You have a lot of experience in training, capacity building. So I wanted to ask Gonzalo about the experience in capacity building of staff in tax administrations, how to help them address current challenges. So what is the most important of these, Gonzalo? Well, I think that the largest challenge that as tax administration faces is its sustainability, because these tax administrations, when a problem arises, they focus their efforts, but then there's a step backward. It's difficult to maintain the knowledge in-house. And I think that's the best the example. It's not about creating, it's about sustaining and gradually evolving. I think it's a complex issue. And I think the challenge will depend on the country. Some countries have more challenges than others. We could look at the exchange of information. We could look at the situation in Bermuda. I think we need to, there needs to be organization and have a structured plan to address priorities. And one has to pick one's battles. I think that identifying risk is one of the big challenges. Another challenge, I don't want to take up too much time, is is whether or not a country decides to be in an international forum. And if it does decide to do so, does it have the capacity to sustain its involvement, to state its position and defend its position? So this is a necessary capacity that tax administrations need to have. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. There's much yet to be done and much progress yet to be made. And we're running out of time with just a few minutes left. But I do think it's important to ask the following question, and I'd like to address it to Ubaldo. In your experience with the Spanish tax administration, you've been working with them for a long time. Are there difficulties with countries of the region? Not only countries of the region, but outside the region. How can we learn about the operations of a multinational that's in country A, but with permanent establishment outside of the country? How do we proceed? I'm aware of this risk, yes. And to answer your question, there is a tool available to all. And this is the country by country report, the BEPS. This is the only advantage. It's a substantial advantage. It is clearly the tool that we need. And why do I say that? The country by country report does an X-ray, if you will, of the situation. And by looking at this scan, this is the way to identify that a company operating in a certain country, for example, in Uruguay, is facing a risk. There are different types of taxation in different regions. It helps us in looking at all of this. Different experiences at the international level. An auditor can determine whether or not it is worthwhile to audit a subsidiary in a certain country, for example, to look at permanent establishment. So, Monica, I don't want to give too many examples here, but I think countries have to enter into the system, an inclusive system where information is exchanged. It's not difficult. Many countries have access to these reports. Thank you very much, Ubaldo. I know you have to leave for the airport, so thank you very much for your contributions and your response. And we're over time by 10 minutes, so I would like to conclude this podcast by thanking our participants, to thank very much the Secretariat of TADAT for this opportunity, for this time to discuss international taxation. Further, I'd like to thank the participants who presented cases. It's been very, very interesting. We have the recording of the podcast, of course, for those who haven't been able to listen from the outset. And the podcast will be available at on LinkedIn and YouTube and on the TADAT webpage. If you have further questions, it is possible to submit those questions on the TDOT Secretariat webpage. I would like to thank Justin, the Secretariat of TDOT, and all participants. Thank you very much.
Y creo que lo vamos a terminar ahí. Muchas gracias a todos.
And I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Que tengan buen día.
Gracias
Muchas
a todos.
gracias.
Gracias, Mónica, por el trabajo. Marcia, Humberto,
Gracias,
Ana.
Gonzalo.
Bye.
Adiós.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.